And here my brush is super soft. Spin it a little bit forward and it's a bit harder. Spin it a bit more, even harder, a bit more, and it's 100%. So you have the control even over that. Hi guys, my name is Dante. So in the recent video I talked about my idea of the perfect drawing setup, including stuff like having different angles available for your drawing tablet, whether it's a drawing display or screenless tablet. Now today I want to cover another part of this subject, which is our second hand. For someone it may be this one, but I guess for most people it's the left hand. And well, what kind of device that hand should be busy with? Somewhere in what I just said there's an inappropriate joke, but I just can't figure it out. Anyway, so the traditional way would be probably using a keyboard, right? For your shortcuts and all kinds of commands. A lot of people actually prefer using buttons on the tablet. Not a lot of buttons there. Honestly, I don't think it's ever actually enough, so you always have to have your keyboard around. But anyway, yeah, these are the two traditional ways of working with a drawing tablet, either a keyboard or express buttons on your tablet. But recently I've been looking at some alternatives, since the keyboard, while it's sort of almost perfect, it has all the keys on it, but it doesn't have any kind of scrolling wheel, and when you have a pen in your hand, there's no scroll on it, which would be a great idea, don't you think? Like higher, maybe? I don't know why it's not a thing. And while keyboards are generally really big, it's not the perfect solution. So many of you guys notice this summer I was playing around a lot with PlayStation 4 Controller. I was just testing it out, hesitating to release a video about it, and generally I would probably not do it because, well, it didn't work out that great. I managed to make it do everything I wanted it to do, but it's just the form factor really that made it not that great. First of all, real quick, what you gotta do to make it work with Windows and do whatever you want it to do, you install this app. It's called DS for Windows. This is a really powerful app that lets you set up your DualShock 4 controller to act as anything you want. So you can see right now I'm easily controlling the cursor. You can take full advantage of the touch rectangle right here. You select any button and you map it to any key, any mouse function, Xbox controller function. You can also add like macros. It doesn't even stop there. You can add like special actions. Like I programmed it to like tilt it upwards. Right now it glows with cyan, which means it's at 100% battery. I won't go too deep into how to set it up. For those of you who's interested in setting this up the way I did it, I'll share these 3 presets I have, and hopefully I think that will be enough to have all the settings working exactly the same way, except for this auto profiles setting. So in here specifically, you choose all the art apps that you want to use the controller with and make them switch your controller to the artwork profile right here. But yeah, that's the way I did it. It did everything I wanted it to do, but it's more about just the ergonomics, I guess, or whatever. It turned out that the PlayStation controller is actually pretty heavy when you hold it in one hand, and you only have like access to the left half of the buttons, and most of them are directional or something, like weird triggers or touch things or these soft movements that are not applicable at all in controlling the brush settings or something like that. So yeah, that's why I ended up dropping this whole idea. It worked, but it's just about the shape of it, I guess. It's not the best. It wasn't made with artists in mind. So I kind of forgot about the whole idea. But recently, the guys from TourBox contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do a review of this little thingy right here. And I thought, well, this is just perfect. This is literally the continuation of my whole thing with a PlayStation controller. Now, this is pretty much the same thing with its own software to set it up any way you want, while it has a much better deal with ergonomics and the kind of controls that you get. Oh, by the way, before we continue, I want you guys to know that this is not a sponsored video. They just sent me the device itself, but I wasn't paid to say anything, and this video, this review, you guys will be the first one to see it, so all yours honest opinions. So let's dive into it. TourBox has 3 scrolling alternative things. One of them is an actual scroll wheel. It has scrolling up and down and pressing the scroll wheel. So that's the functionality of that. Then we have the knob, something close to what the musicians have when they control stuff. All it does is spinning left and right, but it doesn't end there. There's a lot of combinations as well. The third scrolling thing is this dial. Also, it's just spinning left and right, but it's more of like a flat thing. All of them are pretty much about changing something from 0% to 100%. So aside from these 3 scrolling, rotating controls, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 buttons. Now 4 of them are very special ones. The one on the left, the one on the top, and the 2 big buttons on the bottom right. And they're very special because they're actually imitating the default modifier keys on a keyboard. Usually when you hold your hand on the keyboard, that will be pinky on the control, the ring finger on the shift key, and the thumb will be switching between alt and space. And that's usually the way you hold things. So on TourBox, the pinky goes over here, the shift button is over here, usually with the middle finger, and the thumb switches between these 2. So literally 100% of the time, it's a good idea to set this button as a control, this one as shift, and these 2 as alt and space. And moving on from there, your thumb also has a great access to the directional keys right here, up, down, left, right. Then we also have the 2 special buttons right here that are for doing something back and doing something forward. Usually that's why they're positioned like that. So these are perfect for undoing and redoing. And one special button over here at the bottom, it doesn't even work with any kind of combinations. I usually use it as Control S, save the document. There's a lot of combinations with keys that are Control, Alt, Shift, and Space with all the scrolling things, except for the dial. Dial just does its own thing, and that's it. And yeah, that's about it. This is the whole thing. It's pretty heavy, so it doesn't go anywhere. When you're pressing with a pinky on the side button, the whole thing won't move. So it's heavy enough and rubberized enough at the bottom. The whole thing actually feels like rubber, but I think it's just that it's the kind of plastic that is matte like that. It gives quite a good amount of friction. So that's pretty cool. As you can see, there is a little port in here. So this is a Type-C connection. It's not a wireless thing. Contrary to the PlayStation controller or the TabMate, TourBox uses a cable, a nice braided Type-C to Type-A cable. The buttons are not super well built, like they're not amazing or anything, like they make a little bit of an empty noise. The worst part of the build is probably this main knob. It works perfectly, nothing ever fails me, there's no skipped clicks or turns, everything works really well, but generally the feel of the knob and the dial is really cheap, like super cheap empty plastic. There's no steps as well, no ratchet mechanism, the way there is on the scroll wheel. So scroll wheel works like an actual scroll wheel on a mouse, because I think it's literally the scroll wheel from a mouse repurposed for TourBox. But the dial and the knob, they're completely free to spin, and that's something I wasn't really happy about on Innovator 16's dial, which isn't great. Sometimes you can accidentally spin it by just moving your hand around between the buttons. Nothing like that actually happened here, I guess because of the positioning of everything. You really don't move your hand anywhere, you just move your fingers, really. I tried it for a while, for I think like 2 weeks I was trying this thing. Never happened that I would accidentally spin any of the controls or something like that. But yeah, they don't feel really great. So now about the software. I'm gonna put my keyboard over here and the TourBox will be on the left. This is the way I usually use it. It's just sitting right here, a bit lower. Of course, if you have a smaller tablet or something like that, right, it would be on the side. TourBox would be just sitting on the table to the left from it. Totally comfortable, maybe more comfortable than the way I use it. So the software is pretty cool. There are some things that I wasn't super happy about, and I actually sent a huge email to them with some of ideas, but generally as it is right now, it's more than usable. Really cool. Let's talk about all of that. So here are my Photoshop controls. Right now, as it is, like this whole page, this is all the things you need to set up, but there's more under these buttons. These are for all kinds of combinations, but at first you just think about this. I found the best way to set it up is by thinking about your app that you want to set up, right? So you're creating a new profile, you call it like, I don't know, Blender, right? I'll create a Blender preset. And then I'll press this link button and I'll link it to the app that is currently open. Right now it's not open, so it's not there. And you see the whole preset thing is empty. You can actually download more presets from TourBox website. The community is creating more presets for all kinds of apps, including video editing apps, all kinds of drawing apps. But anyway, the way you work with it, so you create a new preset for your app, you link that, and then you think like, what do you want the main knob to do? So you spin it, and here it shows like knob. I click on it, and now I set up the shortcut. What will it do when I spin to the left? What will it do when I spin to the right? So in my case, I use that as shortcuts for increasing and decreasing brush size. Then I'll hold the shift equivalent. As you can see, this top thing is getting selected when I press it. And then I'll spin the knob, and it immediately unfolds the extra controls, and it shows that this combination is used for brush flow. So if I hold shift and spin the knob, it will be changing the brush flow. Then if I press the Alt alternative and spin the knob, it will show me that I'm using that for brush opacity. Then I hold space and spin the knob, and that's the control for brush hardness. So that's, I guess, the best part about TourBox. It actually brings a lot more control than what you would have with a keyboard and even the mouse. So right now in Photoshop, instantaneously I have the control of the brush size. Holding shift, that's the control of opacity. Flow will be holding alt. And finally, like holding space and spinning. And here my brush is super soft. Spin it a little bit forward and it's a bit harder. Spin it a bit more, even harder, a bit more, and it's 100%. So you have the control even over that, which is really cool. I know a lot of artists use the two types of brushes when they work. It's a hard brush and a soft brush. A hard brush for painting pretty much everything, but soft brushes are usually for shading skin and all stuff that is supposed to actually appear soft. So that's like a faster way of shading instead of like going with a lot of semi-transparent, you know, this kind of shading. Definitely a great thing to have at your fingertips when you work. Also, there are official presets. 2 of them are actually baked into the software. Right here you see when I'm creating the new preset, I can either fill it up with Photoshop controls. So all the controls will be set up to the way TourBox team thought would be the best to use in Photoshop or in Lightroom. So there's even more controls for Lightroom. I noticed there's so much controls for that. Actually, the preset itself is rather empty, but just in here, when you're selecting any kind of functionality, keep in mind, in general, you can set up any kind of key from the keyboard and any kind of scroll wheel action from the mouse to use with any of the controls on the TourBox. So that's pretty much the way it's compatible with any app. Even like with a game, I guess, although I never tried using it in a game. But that's the point. This is like another alternative shape of an input device that introduces new types of controls that can do actions in any app that has keyboard shortcuts. But on top of that, some of the functions go beyond what a keyboard and mouse can do, something that can actually take advantage of a lot of these spinning controls in TourBox. So that's why Lightroom controls have actual special commands right here. So aside from that, let me show you the other controls. So I'll hold the pinky button and press upwards. That'll create a new layer. So when I hold hold pinky, that's what I like about the settings in here, the way the layout is made. So there are like certain groups of buttons that are very easily identifiable to the touch. That's kind of the point of them, right? They're not just an array of buttons that you will completely not be able to figure out if there will be just a lot of them. So in this case, there's this arrow, so it's 4 commands. And when I just press them, they will be actually doing what the arrow keys do on the keyboard. Because I think that's pretty much useful in any art app at all. No matter what app it is, eventually you will need actual raw up, down, left, and right input to maybe move 1 pixel to the right for the whole thing that you selected or something like that. So that's what I left it as is. If I hold pinky, the whole set of these 4 directional buttons become layer commands. So that's what's cool about it. Like you hold it and now you know that all of it is just layers. So you remember that upwards means create new layer, to the right duplicating layer, down is merging layer, and to the left I actually made it to mirror the canvas. And if I hold the upper key, the shift equivalent, up arrow will be an eraser, down arrow a brush, left arrow will be a selection, and right would be a finger tool. So that gives you a lot of different hotkeys at your fingertips. Oh yeah, by the way, the scroll wheel is obviously the control for zooming the canvas. And what's really cool, if you press the scroll wheel, it fits canvas to screen, which is awesome. So now, as I described generally the way TourBox is awesome and why you should look into it at all, I think generally we went through the way it works, I guess. Now, the best way to describe what this thing is to go through those notes I made before that I sent to TourBox team, so you guys would have an idea of the limitations of TourBox, at least at the moment. So first of all, one thing that I immediately thought TourBox needs to have, and it doesn't have a system-wide profile. So in Photoshop, I set it up to do all these things with the brush and everything, right? So the scroll wheel does this and that. But if I open something as simple as like File Explorer, TourBox doesn't do a thing. So settings can be only set up for one specific program at a time, and there's no system-wide profile. You would have to find every separate system program that's like Windows settings program, File Explorer program, your browser program, and set that stuff up separately every time. So I expressed my idea to the TourBox team that it would be really cool to create a no-name profile, that when you're in an app that doesn't have a specific profile dedicated to it, TourBox would be doing the default actions that's used for everything else. Now, there's also a couple of limitations about what kind of combinations you can map to the thing. So I noticed that Space Alt doesn't really work. In Corel Painter, Space Alt is used to, like, you hold that and then you can rotate the canvas with your pen. So I couldn't map that, and it would be really cool. So that's the thing. Sometimes you have to wait for them to add functionality. In here, you see anything that has to do with mouse actions, like the mouse scroll specifically. You can map like Shift scroll, Control scroll, Alt scroll, and just scrolling. But Control Alt and scroll, it's not in the list. And you can't just map it in here. So I expect that list to grow with future updates, hopefully. Oh yeah, another thing, that little thing where you hold space, you move the canvas around, then you hold Control with space to zoom in, then you release Control while still holding space to move the canvas. So it works perfectly, right? I hold Control, zoom in, I release Control, and I keep panning, because the space is always pressed. But in TourBox, if you hold space, it will be panning. If I'll hold Control with space, it will be zooming around. Then I'll release Control, and I'm still holding space button, but it's not registering because I let go of one button and it decided to register that as if I released everything. So I need to let go of space and press on it again. That's the way to make it work again. And every time after you zoom in, you need to let go and press on space again to move. this little quirky bug, or I don't know how to call it, not really a bug, but the logics of the way keys are registered, I guess. It brings this little limitation that makes you release and press the button again. So yeah, I hope the TourBox team will be able to make that work, because they're actually really dedicated apparently to make TourBox 100% replace the keyboard. So no compromises. It should work just like the keyboard and much more on top of that. Right, another thing, not really a limitation, but something I really wanted TourBox to do to improve in Photoshop comparing to using the keyboard. Problem with Photoshop is that when you try to undo a lot of actions, you would naturally try to press Ctrl-Z, like press and hold, and expect it to undo a lot in a row. But Photoshop doesn't do it. Every single step needs to be a new pressing. And in TourBox, there's a special function right here, RPT, which stands for repeat, but if you hover, it says it's sending a continuous command, which means it's simply like if I press and hold, it will also send that I'm actually pressing and holding. And if you don't use repeat, all it means is that even if I press and hold, it will send the command that I just pressed. Which is, I don't know where this difference is useful. I thought it would be much more useful for RPT mode to actually send the repeating command, sending with a little delay, you know, like, I don't know, 5 times per second, Ctrl-Z, Ctrl-Z, Ctrl-Z. But sadly, TourBox doesn't do it. If I press and hold, it will be just one command at a time, which is kind of a bummer. I hope they'll improve it, although they didn't seem to be very eager about it. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Another one thing about TourBox is that some apps don't really have the necessary shortcuts. You guys know I recently used Corel Painter a lot for illustrating Outlandish Curiosity, so I was using TourBox all the time as I was painting, and it works really cool, but the problem with that is that I was able to use TourBox for all the functionality just the way it is in Photoshop, except for the most awesome ones, meaning all these extra combinations with a knob. And that's because Corel Painter only has shortcuts for increasing and decreasing brush size. And any kind of other extra functions, they're just not there. So here I am easily duplicating the layer, changing the brush size, but then I would hold shift and spin and it doesn't do anything because literally in Corel Painter, for instance, there is no shortcuts for increasing and decreasing opacity of the brush. So that's not really possible. What TourBox team said the only way to make that work if they would create these specific, like app-specific commands the way they did for Lightroom. So they would add more stuff like that, like specific commands for Corel Painter. Sometimes it feels like you would expect things to, of course, be there, but they're just not. Which is like the biggest bummer about such a huge potential with TourBox, but many of your favorite apps may just not have the keyboard shortcuts to map to all these spinning controls that are so great for a lot of stuff. In Photoshop, it has all kinds of stuff. It's really good. It has full support of Photoshop, of course. I tried it in Adobe Premiere Pro as I was editing the previous episode. It can do a lot of things. It's really cool. You really feel like some kind of professional video editor that can like spin and move stuff around. So yeah, I guess pretty much that's the whole picture of what TourBox is to me. It's an amazing little new thing to really work with. It can really work. It definitely does at least everything the keyboard can do in a much more of an ergonomic fashion. You know how a lot of shortcuts in many apps are somewhere on the right side of the keyboard, which is like, who's that for? My right hand is with a mouse or a pen, and the left hand, it needs to work on the left side only because that's where Ctrl-Z is. And in here, you map all of that and it's just right here. You barely move your hand. It's so comfortable. But to go somewhere beyond what a keyboard can do, you really need to work with a software that has those shortcuts. It just comes down to that. Also, while this is not sponsored, TourBox gave me an affiliate link. So with everything I said today, if you're interested in purchasing TourBox, the affiliate link is in the description. If you really wanna like make sure if it works in like a long term or something, check out my future videos. If I'm still using this thing, then it works. So far, I'm planning to keep using TourBox. I think it's gonna be really cool. When I'm actually like drawing or something, this is super comfortable. It was made for the hand, obviously. Someone decided to come up with a stuff like this. I really hope this will become kind of like a trend. I hope there will be more stuff like this coming up on the market, and hopefully with like iOS support maybe, although I think it's barely possible, maybe impossible at all. I don't think you can like have an app on iOS that would be remapping keyboard input. So on TourBox website, yeah, macOS and Windows, that's all that is supported. So yeah, tell me guys what you think. Maybe you know more, maybe you know less. Ask questions, or maybe tell me about some other gadgets I don't know about that are already exist. But so far, yeah, TourBox is at the very least a really cool addition to the drawing setup. So yeah, this is it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Man, it's almost painful to have such a powerful control over the brush in Photoshop, but then actually having to work in Corel Painter because of a much more advanced brush engine and not having a good chunk of that control over the brush, kind of painful.